So to deliver the closing remarks and vote of thanks, I'd like to welcome um, first Dean Alex Triantis. He's the Dean of the Carey Business School. He's co-chair of the GKI board, and his leadership continues to shape Hopkins' global engagement and commitment to inclusive growth. And straight after Alex, we'll hear from Mr. Raj Gupta, co-chair and founder of Gupta Klinsky India Institute, and a global business leader and philanthropist whose dedication has been foundational to the Institute's mission. And personally, he's been such a guiding light for me in my role as executive director as well. So we'll hear from Alex first, and then Mr. Gupta.
Thank you, Kunal. That is a very difficult panel to follow. I'll do my best here, but let me just first of all start by my thanks to so many people here. First of all, to all the audience who has been with us for a day and a half now, and it's been a pleasure to meet many of you. The sponsors, the supporters, and as we just mentioned, Kunal and Nitisha, and I think Raj will say a little bit more, so I'll stop there. But tremendous work, and can't thank you enough. This has been a learning trip for me. I didn't get to go too far, but I learned a great deal. And to me, this conference really represents the best of what universities have to offer. We come to university to provide knowledge, or universities provide knowledge. There's a great deal of knowledge transfer. That's the first thing. The second thing is people come to universities to be inspired by people, by ideas, by their colleagues, and so on. Third of all, we come to universities to be connected to people. I won't use the word networking, but to connect to people, which is extremely important. And fourth, and I think perhaps most importantly to point out these days, we come to universities to be able to have disagreements, to learn from each other, to compare different perspectives and ideas. And I think this past day and a half has really exemplified all of that. I think I'm supposed to summarize it all, which is, of course, absolutely impossible. But let me just say a few things along those 4 lines. First of all, the last day and a half has been a crash course on India, Indian relationships with the U.S., and the incredible progress happening in India from 80 leading experts. And these days, one feels like knowledge transfer just can happen through AI. But I can tell you that what universities do, and do well, is they curate knowledge in very specific ways. And I think the past day and a half has been an incredible example of how I've learned so much, which maybe I'm just poor at prompts with AI, but there's no way I would have learned this with a few hours in front of AI. We heard a lot from the chief economic advisor to the prime minister. We heard a lot of facts about the overall Indian economy and the world-leading GDP growth in India. We learned a lot about various sectors, from agriculture to strategic technologies, and all the components that are required to drive strategic technologies, including talent and education, resources like energy, as well as policies that enable innovation. We learned about trade corridors and trade cooperations, such as I2U2 and the India, Middle East, Europe corridor. We learned about trends for undergraduate and graduate education around the world. At least I did, learn a lot of key acronyms and catchphrases, and plus ones and minus ones. That would be China +1 and N-1 uncertainties. And many critical insights, such as thinking about value creation versus wealth creation, thinking about the need for value innovation experts in an AI-ready nation. Again, all of this was put together in an incredible way with a great set of 80 speakers. The second is inspiration. And I'm looking at some notes that I jotted down before the last session. So if you can trust me that I was going to say this regardless of the session that we just had. To me, perhaps most inspiring of all, and even more so now with the last session, was hearing about the powerful impact of unleashing the full force of Indian women. And those are words that came out of the former minister's presentation this morning, which was incredibly forceful. But again, the panel that we just heard was equally impactful. By the way, the word mentoring was used, I'm going to guess, about 30 times. And so I'm going to ask the obvious question, why is it called mentoring? I'm inspired by that, to say that because when my daughter was, I think, 5 years old, and my wife was saying prayers to her before she was about to go to bed, she looked at my wife and said, "Why is it amen and not women?" So we can do that probably with a lot of words, but it gives us a different perspective. The other is, and I get this every day, being fortunate to be here at Hopkins, is just all the significant medical and population health innovations that we are seeing that are saving lives. And for those of you inside of Hopkins, and hopefully many of you from outside of Hopkins, you're aware of this recent campaign that we have called Research Saves Lives, which really is to bring to the forefront how important the research is that we do and how it does save lives. The third thing that I mentioned that universities do is that they connect people. And we heard many times over the last day and a half the expression people to people. And we emphasize partnerships, after all, part of the theme of the conference, built on trust, not the acronym trust, but the good old-fashioned trust, where we learned how critical it is to build relationships over time, and that if you can do that well and have them deep-rooted, that you can get through rough times, such as we have now, to progress and achieve the goals that were set despite all the challenges. At the government level, we heard about G2G, about how G2G requires iterating and pivoting, just the same way that innovation does with startups or with large firms. And we stressed, and many of the speakers stress, the three key pieces of education working together with industry or the private sector and the government together. And if universities and government, at least we feel recently, aren't working quite as closely together, it's all the more reason for industry and education sectors to work very closely together and to enable change, but hopefully all three. Universities, finally, are a setting, as I said, for informed and robust discussion of sometimes conflicting or at least alternative perspectives. And a great example was yesterday. I was struck by the contrast where the first few sessions that we had focused on progress and development through innovation. And a lot of it was on accelerating innovation, leveraging education workforces, reducing regulation. And then all of a sudden, we had a very different perspective focused on humanity and equity and the importance of a nurturance economy. How can we achieve both? We have to achieve both. And so that is the beauty of having these two perspectives presented and trying to find a common solution. Today, the CEA shared a graph, I believe it was him, about the low optimism in India at 36% and even lower in the US at 30% from the Edelman Trust Barometer, both below the median for the set of countries that were shown. Gives you pause as we focus on accelerated economic growth rather than other metrics. Hopefully we can have significant progress while preserving humanity, but that's where the important nuances and policy perspectives lie. Finally, recently I would say that many of us, maybe all of us, have been very focused on dealing with challenges, in particular with this recent federal transition as well as geopolitical shocks. And it's felt like in the US we've been very focused inwards about what's going on at home. And two areas of focus of this conference, innovation and partnerships, I think have both been recently challenged in different ways. But I can tell you that after spending the last day and a half with all of you, I feel a strong sense of optimism and opportunity. Again, building partnerships that have deep roots and can be sustained through ups and downs are so critical. And it's what education and these convenings help to build. And we know that India and the US have shared priorities, and that there is bipartisan support in the US for strong US-India relationships. So that gives us further hope. So let me end on that note of optimism, and again, a huge thanks to GKII for this very successful inaugural and annual conference. So I'll see you next year.
Thank you, Alex, and please keep it going for Mr. Raj Gupta.
Well, these are hard acts to follow. Thank you, Alex, for those wonderful closing comments. But I cannot ignore what I heard from the last panel here. So I was born in a family with 4 sisters and a strong mother and 1 brother. Men were always a minority. And then I married a very strong lady who's sitting right here. And then I had 2 daughters who were strong in their own way. So I learned humility in front of women all my life. So I'm proud of that. So this has been beautiful. So let me say first to all of you for thank you for joining this event. It has far exceeded certainly my expectations as well. And the topics and the participation was just incredible. And the breadth of coverage over the last day and a half is nothing short of extraordinary. I think we covered a range of topics which would take months and months to really deal with and digest. So let me first start with a little bit of my own journey as to what got me here. I won't take too much time. So like most Indian immigrants who moved to the United States in the 60s, were basically allowed $8 to come from Reserve Bank of India. And I had my undergraduate degree from IIT Bombay, and I always dreamed about coming to the United States to study and go back and become a professor in operations research at IIT Bombay, where I graduated from. That was my dream. One of the conditions my parents put, you are going to America not without getting married. So they introduced me to my dear wife here of 57 years, Kamla, and it has been an amazing journey. And of course, you know, what happened was at Cornell, I realized that proving A plus B equals B plus A, it was operations research, was not something that I could relate to. And I wanted to be more practical as an engineer. So instead of doing my PhD, I decided to go in business, which was not something that was part of our family. So my first job was at Scott Paper Company. So anybody here who uses paper towels and tissues knows about Scott Paper. And the reason I chose Scott Paper was funny, because I had 3 job offers, IBM, Burroughs, and Scott Paper. And I chose Scott Paper for very simple reasons. It was the warmest of the 3 locations. Second thing was we were expecting Amita. And the only relative I had in the United States was Ed Villanova, professor, my father's younger brother. Those are the 3 reasons, and most important, Scott Paper sent a company plane to pick me up and drop me for an interview. Can you imagine this in 1969? So those are the reasons I joined Scott Paper. The next step was I did my MBA at night school at Drexel. And after I finished that, my parents were still living, and they basically said that we want you to come back to India. And Scott Paper had no operations in India. Roman Haas did. I interviewed them, and I got a job. But believe it or not, I spent 39 years in that company. I never went back and worked in India. But I think it was an amazing 39-year journey. And again, I give credit to my family for being so accommodating and adjusting. So we ended up living in 3 countries, 10 years in England, 5 years in France, and of course, United States. Then we spent 5 years in Asia. So we were all over the world, and that's where they grew up. And I think, that was an amazing, I had 13 jobs and 17 bosses. I survived them all, and last 10 years as chairman and CEO, and I retired when the company was sold to Dow Chemical in spring of 2009. And this one final comment I would say is what led us to start the foundation and contributing to India and US. So we were very fortunate, to really acquire some money, and we said, the company I worked with, Roman Haas, the Haas family was a very generous family. In fact, today even is probably the largest community family in Philadelphia in terms of charitable activities. And I saw the way the culture was and how important it was to give back. So that's really led us to setting up the Foundation Ujala in fall of 2009. And we collectively talked about this and said, what are the two most important things that make a difference? And we said education and healthcare. Those are the two platforms we said are the most important ones that make a difference. The second thing, obviously I felt that I had an obligation to the country where I was born, India, and of course the country that I adopted as my adopted home and I'm a citizen of. So we'll split equally between US and Europe, and these are the two domains that we'll focus on. So we set up this foundation, and by the way, the Haas family contributed half of our initial funding for that foundation as a thank you for what we were able to do together. And I think that eventually led to really two different things. One was, instead of setting up a big organization, having proposals come from left, right, and center for the funding, we basically said, we're just going to support the causes that we believe in and the people and organizations we trust. And that has been still, even 15 years later, the fundamental thing that we have followed. And as a result, we have a number of fellowships at Cornell and Drexel in the name of our parents, a governance institute at Drexel, and of course, a lot of local organizations in Philadelphia, but the biggest contribution has been the launch of Gupta Institute. That also goes back to something else, and I think that goes back to our commitment to people we trust, organizations we trust, as well as, so I think, Amita has been at Hopkins since 2003 in infectious diseases and working in India from the very start. So we felt comfortable after meeting her colleagues in India and seeing the work they were doing, that this was an institution, this was an organization that we could really support in good faith. And that really led to the start of, and it's, of course, Sunil Kumar, who was the provost here, was also extremely helpful in setting up and directing us in the process. One other thing I would say, you might say, what is this name Klinsky means here? So in my retirement, I worked with a private equity firm called New Mountain Capital, which now manages $60 billion. I've been with them for 15, 16 years. And when I started, one day he was just talking to me and he said, so what are you planning to do? And I said, this is our next initiative. And this was a 10-second conversation. He said, I am in it, my wife and I are in it for whatever you're putting in. It was, I have never raised $5 million in 5-second conversation. And so I think they are not here, but I just want to acknowledge them, and they have continued to add and remain, both of them remain on the board of Hopkins India Institute, and dear friends and very supportive of what we are doing. In fact, Amita, you're going to be meeting them sometime in early July. And I'm still associated with their firm. So this is a long summary of kind of our journey in terms of what's led to it. In addition to John Bollinger is the Gupta professor at the Hopkins infectious diseases. So now let me get back to what really is more important, but I thought I'd just share that background with you about our journey and also what led to Gupta Institute. So let me first say thank you for all the organizers here, and I'll start with Kunal and Natisha. Thank you so much. It's really been incredible, and Our proof. I mean, I saw what they did for our India trip last November, December. It was unbelievably well organized, and they demonstrated that they can do this at another level. Also want to really thank the session leaders here, chairs here. I hope I get all the names right. Uttara Kumar, Joshua White, Reena Agarwal, Gigi Kronwal, Niranjan Chatterjee, Sarah Bennett, Praveen Krishna, Sridevi Sharma, Avani Prabhakar, Sunil Solomon, Chirag Parekh, Yusuf Yazdi, and Anita Shet. So all of you, thank you for organizing amazing sessions as well. And of course, all the panel members we were able to recruit during the process. And of course, there are a number of partners who made this possible. It wasn't just the Johns Hopkins India team or the Johns Hopkins University team. We had support from Nexus Award and the Bloomberg Center, India Spora, and Sanjeev Joshipura is here. He's extremely helpful in getting many of the participants. America-India Foundation yesterday evening event, and of course the media partners in South Asia Times, the American Bazaar, India Abroad, Dia TV, and the South Asian Herald. So many partners who made all this possible. Just I don't think I need to go in the history of GKII itself, but it's really been the legacy of Hopkins. The professors and collaborators from Hopkins have worked in India for over 100 years. So this has been a long association. It's not something that started with the Gupta Kalinsky Institute. And over this time, 160 professors and faculty members of Hopkins have worked in India and on their own raised $330 million to do work in India. So it has not been a small effort. It's an incredible history that is behind this. And when we thought about setting up the Hopkins India Institute was to do few things. One was building the brand of Hopkins in India. Hopkins is obviously very well known for healthcare and medicine, but broadly building the brand of Hopkins in India was one of the objectives. Of course, not just to build the name, but also to allow us to become partners with local and the government and all of that, because building the brand has a long ways to go in that process. And the second one, as we have gone into it, is to really say what are the 3 or 4 most important things we can do in terms of making an impact, not only in collaboration between Hopkins and India, but also around the world. And we really landed, at least at this time, with 3 priorities. One is elimination of TB in schools and communicable diseases broadly. I think that is definitely one of the highest priorities. The second one, you heard about STEM program, which we have very high hopes to elevate women in India in terms of science, in the STEM field. And the third one, of course, is how do you make healthcare and public health affordable and accessible using cross-functional approach of AI and all the other expertise that is needed. And that's where you have the broader faculty of Johns Hopkins, from business school to engineering school to technology. Everything is included in collaborating as to how do we use the AI and the expertise that Hopkins has in public health and healthcare to make healthcare affordable to masses. And if we are able to contribute small part in doing that, I think that would be incredible accomplishment. So I think let me just sort of share a couple of thoughts, just takeaways from the last couple of days. One was, I came to India from India in 1968 January. It's been a long time, but we've been very fortunate to travel back to India just about every year in the last 25, 30 years, and sometimes more frequently. And I have certainly noticed few things that have changed dramatically, and just share with you my perspective of this over this time. One is obvious, the infrastructure. It is in a different place than it was, say, even 10 years ago or 20 years ago. The second thing I would say, the confidence and optimism across the board, organizationally, individually, and as a nation. It is at a different level than it ever was. Obviously, there are other opportunities to work on. We have talked about here in terms of education quality. We have talked about complexity and bureaucracy of operating in India and regulations. And of course, long-term success that really depends on doing research and innovation and of course, capital investing. So there are opportunities for India, but I think to be in a position where we are as a nation, and of course, the improving relationships between the US and India are really a great opportunity for India as well as United States to collaborate and really make a huge, huge difference for the world. And I think those are some of my takeaways, and the only word of caution I put is confidence is great, but overconfidence and arrogance is not so good. And I think though we have made a start here in our institute, hopefully it'll lead to some bigger things, but I think it's going to be a lot of hard work, and I just say thank you to all of you for all your support and your encouragement to take us to another level. And have a safe trip back.